Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Baxter, and I was the original machine learning lead behind Community Notes at X. And today I'll be talking about what's next after that, and basically the future of public epistemics. One helpful distinction to start out, I think, is whether we're talking about raising the ceiling or raising the floor. I think there's a ton of cool stuff in the raising the ceiling, like pushing the frontiers of human understanding and wisdom side of things, like automating scientific discovery. But for this talk, I will be focusing on the other side of things, which is like helping people agree on a shared reality and just improve society's overall epistemic health. I think probably a lot of you are familiar with how community notes work, but just in case you're not, here's what they are. They're this little thing that's actually written by a user there, and it says readers added context they thought people might want to know. Before showing publicly are actually rated by other users, and then only after they're rated helpful by a lot of diverse people do they actually show. And I think one, bunch of things to call out about these, but one is, they're not just fact checks. So like in this case, and actually many cases, many of the most important cases, they're actually just adding context to stuff that might have been correct but misleading. Part of the reason they're well loved is like they are pretty bipartisan. They correct misinfo on both sides, right? So we got both White Houses noted here, and quite often they're having a real impact. Like in this case, the White House deleted their tweet after this note, and I have mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, it's awesome, like less wrong stuff out there. On the other hand, I think people don't just read X. They read other stuff. They hear the wrong claims in other places. So probably on balance, I might actually lean towards thinking that it's better to see the post and the note. And like a lot of the best notes you never see because the posts get deleted. But, c'est la vie. Beyond that, I think, this is a bit anecdotal, but I think you see people actually posting differently once they know that community notes are out there. So you saw Joe and Kamwa getting noted for talking about job growth and leaving out the fact that a lot of those jobs are like just recovered from COVID job losses. And then when Hillary posted about the same thing a couple days later, she added that caveat to her post. So pretty cool. Now, what are some of the principles behind this program that makes it work so well? I think one super important ideal is this one of credible neutrality. We're not bringing in some experts who make all the decisions for us. We're not just trusting third-party fact checkers. This is a system that is fully open source, distributed. Actually, critically, it's totally reproducible. You can download the code, run the code on the totally open data, and reproduce the exact results that you'd see in production. That's kind of unprecedented. It's just a lot of engineering work to get that to happen. So basically, no one else in social media does that. But I think it's super important for people to trust the system for something as important as like context and fact checks. And then another surprising thing is that we can make the system work pretty well without external ground truth labels. So I think in 2020, before this existed, if you asked any machine learning engineer, how could you make a crowdsourced fact checking system work? They'd say, well, you have to get some label set somewhere and then figure out which raters are agreeing with those labels. And actually, we were able to do this without that entirely. We were able to lean on instead this cool mechanism that we call bridging or surprising agreement. And kind of the core idea here, this is a funny little picture, but the bridge is actually bridging a partisan divide or polarized divide. Basically, we're only showing notes if they're actually agreed upon by, or they're found helpful by people who typically disagree, and their ratings on other notes. That basically works, especially in polarized settings, because basically people are, often very partisan in their motivations. They're going to do a really diligent job fact-checking something that they're prone to disagree with. And if they're prone to agree with something, just going to kind of let it ride. I don't need to check the source on that. Like, I know that's true. So, but basically, if you're looking for that bridging, you're always going to have some set of people who are motivated to do the deep fact-checking. So this is a great way to bootstrap ground truth labels, and then you could build a reputation system on top of that. Some other cool properties that you get from bridging, like number one, manipulation resistance is super important. So all the time, basically, you get people trying to coordinate and say like, hey, go rate this note, helpful or not helpful. It's super important that needs to not work, right? So luckily, the bridging algorithm means that if people all with one viewpoint do a pile on, they're not going to get a note to show. I'm not really going to talk in detail about the math, but this is the way the algorithm works. I mean, the core idea here is just that we're not like top down labeling users based on like, you're left leaning, you're right leaning. It's entirely emergent based on their history of past ratings, right? And just like a recommender system learns what type of stuff you're interested in, Community Notes learns from your ratings what types of notes you find helpful. And then we only show the notes that are that have rating patterns that you can't explain with just those viewpoints. So like one scatter plot of notes here, just so you can kind of get some intuition for what's going on under the hood, is in this plot, each dot is a note. The x-axis is like one-dimensional viewpoint dimension. The y-axis is the note score. So most notes are actually in the polarized left or right sides there. But actually, we're not showing those. We're only showing the notes that are in the green that are actually found helpful bipartisanly, and we actually penalize the authors of the notes in the red down there. Of course, the world is not one-dimensional, so you need a bunch of other dimensions. For whatever reason, people love misinfo about Messi and Ronaldo. I don't know why, or like why are we debating how many goals they scored? But we are. So this is the world we live in, and actually, it wouldn't work so well if you just had bridging across the left-right political dimension. You might actually accidentally have all Ronaldo fans, and you'd end up with a note that was unfair to Messi or something. So you have to bridge over the relevant topical dimension for this idea to work. Another key thing is that, like, okay, we don't want to bridge over every single person in the world. Like, some people are just trolls or they're wrong all the time or something. So we do need some sort of reputation mechanism for this to work. I'm also not going to dive into the details of this, but like one core idea, just so you can get a flavor of it, is if you think of each note as being like a little prediction market, you can think of raters as trying to predict whether the note will show or not. And then if people are usually correct at doing that, then we'll count their ratings more. How well does this work? One thing that's really cool about it is, despite us not actually using notes to downrank posts, that's just a principle we have. A lot of other platforms will downrank misinformation that their models detect. We think, notes are not always, as you saw in the previous examples, annotating stuff that's like blatantly wrong. It's added context. So you kind of let the organic user behavior drive the direction and reach. And what you see, no algorithm downranking at all. Users will just, on their own, like and repost stuff less if it has a note. And this is a huge effect size, by the way. 30 to 40% less likes or reposts per impression is like over 10 times bigger than you usually see in A/B tests for social media products. Like, you're usually pretty happy with like a 1 or 5% type of change there. And then it's even bigger if you look top line. So this is like per impression, and then this is, once you add up all the network effects, the top line change is like a 50% approximately drop in reposts. One of the biggest criticisms, people say it works pretty well. One of the biggest criticisms is just that there's not enough. So that's actually pretty good. Great. That's a criticism I'm happy with, because, okay, you like the thing, we just want more. So how can we do that? One thing I'm really excited about is the opportunity for cross-platform notes. Meta has a live community notes product. YouTube and TikTok have announced pilots. I think there's a big opportunity for there to be something cross-platform in this space and open. Right now, we're the only platform that actually has open data and open algorithms. So I think there's basically just an opportunity for more there. But even beyond that, I think there's an exciting vision for notes on the whole internet. There's like already a spark of possibility here. So currently, you can write notes on URLs or images and videos. And instead of just appearing on the one post that they were originally written on, they'll match on all of the posts with the same URL or with the same image. So this is like a way for instant speed and scale. But like, imagine how cool it would be if, like, when you opened a web page, a community note could pop up even if you weren't on X. So I think this feature is coming. I even think that, like, as much as people hated Clippy, like, I think community notes solves a lot of the problems with Clippy. Like, Clippy was kind of annoying; it would pop up too much. Community notes only show when the notes are broadly found helpful, so that might actually solve kind of the core problem with Clippy. And there might be a future where, like, in your AR glasses, like, community notes are popping up in real time, or maybe there'll be AI notes in that case. But yeah, okay. So then beyond the scale, another criticism is they're not fast enough. Yes, notes should be faster. They like often take on the order of hours. They are usually or often fast. There's not a great data set about this, but they're often faster than fact checks, which often take an order of days. And then when notes are too slow, we are able to send push notifications to people who engage with them. Those are pretty awesome. But yeah, okay. Despite these things, notes still should be way faster. So let's do that. So AI notes, obviously. Okay, first some other some other things. People hate generic misinfo labels. We learned this in 2020. These things were really bad, right? Like every time anyone would tweet 5G and COVID, it would say like get the facts. Those are annoying, like patronizing. They're not useful. Okay, like this LLMs wouldn't make this mistake and they wouldn't like fall for the simple negation deal. But anyways, one thing that notes did a lot better than those is actually just like have the context right there. They're just specific. And in a survey, people actually found that this is a survey run by an external research group, which is cool because our data is open, so that can happen, which is great. They found that when posts had a note displayed, that users would actually agree with the core claims in the post less. So that's promising. It's not like people's minds don't change about misinfo. Like these are actually changing people's minds. And then beyond that, they found notes are more trustworthy than simple misinfo flags bipartisanly. And then super interestingly for me, in the survey, it was looking like the important thing was actually not that the notes were written by a community or something, or it wasn't important how the algorithm worked. It was important that there was the detail there, right? Like people didn't like the get the facts generic thing. People like the detail. If you go beyond that, like, okay, there's a cool study that shows that if people talk to LLMs about conspiracy beliefs, there's very, very large effect sizes, even for people who have entrenched beliefs. That's great and that's encouraging. One thing that I think could be better about this is that, these are private chats. How can we take this kind of idea and put it out into the world publicly? How can we create like common knowledge, like community notes do? One thing that's been surprisingly good, I think, is people asking Grok, "Is this real? Is this true?" It's like obviously not right all the time. It's an LLM, and all LLMs make mistakes, but it's actually super valuable, I think, for the replies from Grok to be public, so that other people can reply to that. Like when Grok's wrong, like you can correct Grok via this type of public interaction. We can actually, probably collectively get to truth better. Of course, we can improve this. I think this is a useful 2x2 to think about things. You got like speed on the one hand and then quality on the other. And quality has multiple dimensions as well, but like accuracy in particular and helpfulness. Helpfulness is key because like people actually hate, for example, super nitpicky notes. So like quality is not just accuracy. Anyways, if we think of like LLMs as being fast but bad and community notes as being slow but good, how can we like get into the fast but good quadrant? And one exciting thing is it's starting to work. We opened up a pilot project for an open API for people to write their own note writers. So one thing that's super cool about this is it's like sticking to community notes open distributed principles. So like rather than just have Grok writing the notes, anyone can write their own note writer. And the notes don't just show immediately. They're still rated by humans before they show publicly. And it's working pretty well. Currently very clear that the notes are written by an AI contributor, so no one's like fooled about this. As a result, there's a couple AI haters who rate every single AI note not helpful. You know what? Despite that, they're still already showing signs of being superhuman. Like some caveats here for sure, but this is like in the first few weeks of the program, there's one bot that's already showing superhuman note quality. So the higher percentage of their notes are found helpful than average humans by a lot, like 25% versus 10%. And then they're writing more notes than other humans in the same time period. And this is despite a severe handicap. We only let this thing process posts with note requests, which is like a super small percentage of all posts. So I don't know. This thing is going to blow up. It's going to. I mean, this is just working better than I expected. Actually, one thing I'm worried. One thing maybe you could be worried about is, will we lose that human touch? Humans love their bullshit, right? This is funny, and I don't know if that's useful context, but like Bodie McBoat, like, I don't know. It's cool that humans are really in charge of the system right now, and we'd love to keep that, right? One cool idea from a position paper, actually co-authored with Manon, who's right there, this idea of reinforcement learning from community feedback. Basically, could we train an LLM to specifically write notes that are likely to be found helpful by the raters in the community notes program? And I think one thing that's important about this, like beyond just regular reinforcement learning from human feedback, is that we can get around the normal pitfalls of like sycophancy. If you're just optimizing an LLM to get thumbs up in LLM Arena, you're like maybe sacrificing accuracy to just like tell the users that like that was a really good question. In this case, we're like still running the full community notes algorithm on the raters, so we're able to figure out like which raters are diligent and are actually checking that the sources support the note, and like let's trust them more. Let's write notes that are bridging across parse and divides, etc. Another super similar paper is this Supernotes one that is a similar path forward, but basically let's have this idea of a simulated jury. Like basically let's write notes that are predicted to get as good of a score as possible from a simulated set of humans. And then like let's not show them immediately to people. Let's still like get the real human ratings to make sure they're good. But this is very promising. Should I be worried about like the deluge of AI slop, right? Like deep fakes, et cetera? Nico talked about this a bit in his last talk. But before getting into the technical defenses, like I think it's important to look at 100 years ago, people were already worried about Photoshop, and there was like talk of banning fake pictures, for instance. So this is not a new thing. Like we've been dealing with this idea of deep fakes for a long time. People adapt. Right? Like people understand now that AI generated media is possible, and actually a lot of the time when people see AI generated media, they don't feel that notes are needed. So there's a big distinction between the accuracy of the notes versus whether they're needed there. Another super important thing to highlight is distribution cost. So the cost of creating the misinfo is dropping as like deepfake tools get better, but it's still as hard as ever to get eyeballs on your stuff, right? It's actually like really expensive to get distribution. Distribution is why I think like community notes worked well in the first place. There are a ton of other Chrome extension ideas for crowdsourced fact checking that didn't take off just because they never got users. Community notes was like built into Twitter. Okay, so people use it. So distribution is just king, and that's the costs there are not changing. On technical defenses, I think proof of personhood is going to be super important. Community notes leans on that as well. We make sure our users have verified phone numbers with like a real dollar cost to make sure that we're not getting overrun with bots. Watermarks in AI generated media detection. Unsure how that'll pan out. Like that could be a bit of a cat and mouse game. Like I think it'll help on the margin. But like I would still lean more on the human. I think the human side of things, like community notes, will continue to be super important, despite how good AI generated media detection could get. And yeah, I think I guess I already touched on this a bit, but like I don't know, do AI generated videos need notes? I think there is a possibility to make lightweight interventions here, like maybe just a little AI generated flag or something. Because I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense to demonetize someone for a note or for posting something that everyone was supposed to understand was AI generated. One other cool idea that I think I'm really excited about and will help public epistemics a lot is context about the future. So notes are about, right now, mostly about the past. Occasionally, a note will appear after the fact. If a prediction turns out to be wrong, like, okay, China did not bend the knee, like this, but this note appeared like a month afterwards, after the thing was settled, right? So could we have had some sort of annotation on the post that said like, experts think this is unlikely, or I don't know, what would have been helpful there? I think there's a possibility to build something like this. This is a mock-up from Vitalik Buterin of the concept of putting prediction markets on posts. I think something like this is super promising. And then lastly, bridging beyond notes. So I think bridging has been a super successful idea in the core algorithm for community notes, but there's this bigger issue. If you look at social media as a whole, although we're really polarized in the US, for instance, like here, people are actually bimodal on their real beliefs. if you ask people what they perceive the other side's opinions to be, they perceive a way bigger polarization gap than we actually have. And I think that's bad for society. Can we fix it? Part of the problem is social media. Extreme views are overrepresented on social media in part because of the way that algorithms work and just human behavior, right? Like the extreme stuff is interesting, so it gets engagement. One cool thing we could do, and that we actually have launched a pilot about, is piloting posts that got likes from people who typically disagree, right? So I think even if we stayed away from algorithmically upranking this stuff, in the same way that community notes have an impact on distribution, just by adding the annotation, I think we could have a big impact just by annotating that this post actually got likes from people who typically disagree. I think it would do a lot to just make that common knowledge. And the reason it's been tough, I think a lot of platforms have wanted to do stuff like this, and people have been working at it for like 10 years or something. I know of a lot of attempts at different companies. I think it's just a hard algorithmic problem. If you just do this naively, you get memes, right? You get cat videos. What do people typically disagree like? Well, the generic bullshit. So I think the algorithmic challenge, which hopefully we can nail very shortly, is how do you find the stuff that's surprisingly bridging? Basically, is it on a topic that you'd expect would be polarizing and it's actually not? In general, there's a lot of exciting stuff in this space. I'm actually really optimistic about public epistemics, and I think tech is making things probably better more than worse now. So, and there's also lots of ways to get involved if you'd like to. Thank you.